Hello there and greetings. Today I'm going to show you some Cinema 4D techniques for creating a mountain. It's a very simple tool, a very basic kind of mountain. So, with no further delay, let us go into the realm of Cinema 4D. Alright, we're going to start off from the front point of view. In the front viewport, I'm going to use the scroll button on the mouse to click the front view and go there. If you don't see a grid, you want to turn that on to make it a little bit easier for yourself. Under Filter in the interface, we want to locate the grid and make sure there's a check mark on there, and that should be pretty good. Alright, now let's go ahead and grab close that. Let's grab a spline. We're going to do it with a very loose freehand spline. And we're just going to draw an arbitrary kind of mountainous looking peak and then rise and lower that down close to sea level. We'll count this line right here as sea level. Next I'm going to draw another one, and we're going to pretend that this is sort of a layering of a smaller part of the mountain. And I'm going to draw it like that. And then I'm going to draw another one, click and drag, and I might even intersect a little bit right there, kind of go a little bit uneven. That's pretty good. And then lastly, I'm going to draw one going completely across the bottom. Okay? Now I'm going to trace these basic shapes, but I'm not going to trace the peak right here. And I'll explain in a little bit. So we're going to trace the second line that we drew, and it doesn't have to be right on it, just kind of similar height. General height and width. And then of course that third one we drew, we're going to trace one right along with that. And then lastly, we're going to trace that sea level line going across like that. So I'm going to click on the object button over here. So now I'm not going to be modifying these lines anymore at the point level. I'm going to be modifying them at the object level. And you can see them all right here. It might be a good idea to name these accordingly to what they are. Like this top one right here, if I click on it, I can see it right here, and I'll call this the peak. And the second one, I'm going to just call it mid. I'm going to call this mid F for front. And then this one I'm going to call it lower F for front. And then this, I'm going to call this C F for front, and then back to this mid, and then B for back. Double click that one, and then lower, B for back, and lastly C for sea level, B for back. So clicking with the scroll mouse button, I'm going to look at this from the, well, we could do it from the perspective view, but let's make it a little bit easier and more straightforward. Let's go to the right view. In the right view, I can take the peak. I can see that it's right in the middle. That's fine. Now we're going to take the sea level B and move it all the way to the back, right about here. Next, the lower B, I'm going to move that over to this 2 squares away from that. And then the mid, I'm going to move this 2 squares away from the middle. And let's see, the sea level F, I'm going to move it all the way to the second to last square line right there. And then the lower F, I'm going to move that generally 2 squares away from that. And then mid F, 2 squares away from the middle. So we see a very even kind of separation between these things. Now I'm going to use the scroll mouse button and click to exit that. We can see in the perspective view, let's isolate that view with the scroll mouse button, And then using the 2, holding down 2, and clicking and dragging with the left mouse button, I can zoom out and see, and holding down 3 and then clicking and dragging on the left mouse button, I can orbit around 1, hold down 1 and click and drag to look around. And you can see how the mountain is sort of created already with these layers. Okay, last couple steps for this mountain. And this is a basic modeling of mountain ranges here. We're going to click and hold on the hyper NURBS button up here. And we're going to choose loft NURBS. Now what a NURBS is a spline-based surface. And what we're saying is we're going to loft this spline-based surface to create a spline-based surface. So, well, all you have to do is click on the top spline, hold down Shift then, and then click one time on the bottom spline, and then you can grab all of those by clicking and dragging all of them right into the loft NURBS. And this is what I get. So there appears to be a little bit of a issue with our loft NURBS. It might be just a matter of the order that they're in. Let's see, lower and then that. Let's select all of them. Let me see if this changes anything. Nope, that doesn't change anything. Is it a matter of the order is wrong? Let's see what we got here. If we check our settings for the loft NURBS without altering anything, I haven't altered anything yet, but just by selecting loft NURBS, we can see that inside here we have some options. Let's take a look at organic form. If we turn that check mark, that doesn't seem to do anything. Turn on loop. That kind of did something there. Looping it attached the beginning with the end. And I don't know if I really want to do that. Let's check our splines. Let's see if there's anything wrong with those splines. Doesn't appear to be anything out of the ordinary. Maybe what we need to do is change the spline interpolation. Let's take a look at some of these interpolations. No, that doesn't seem to do anything we want. Let's check the loft NURBS again. I'm just turning on items and turning them off. It looks like the path is picking sea level. Oh, the peak is in the wrong order. The peak should be between, and our order is wrong. Okay, so let's see. Peak, mid, lower, sea. Peak, mid, lower, and then sea level. There we go. Now we've got everything in the right order. So the order is sea level, then lower, then mid and peak, and then mid F, and lower F, and C. So there you have it, and that's your basic start to a quick little mountain model. So that's an important thing to make sure you have these in the right order. Otherwise you could end up with something that looks totally screwed up like that. You know, where maybe something isn't counted as part of it, or it looks all weird. The peak has to be right between these two middles, and then the two lowers, and then the sea levels. Alright, now without getting too much into texturing, let's just do a quick little setup for a texture. So So in the material creator, I'm going to choose create, new material. It's going to give me a little material ball right down here. And let's open up the color and give it a texture. We're going to give it a texture of a gradient. Now that there's a gradient in the texture channel, I want to go in there and modify it. So I'm going to click on that gradient. Okay. And if I want to go back to where I was, I can hit the back button right here. Back, see? Forward, back, forward, back. So this is the base level right here, or this is the surface level, I should say, not the base level. And I clicked on that and I got in here. And this is where I can grab these little sliders and I can adjust this. Now we're not going to see our mountain changing until we drag this texture and drop it onto the loft nerves. And now we can see it actually taking effect. But look, it's colorizing our mountain a little bit strange. So we want to change it from a 2D U type gradient to a vertical, meaning a 2D V. And when you do that, you're going to notice some changes happening, although it doesn't seem to turn off cycle, no. Okay. And let's just change some of the color. Double click on the black. Let's give it more of like a grayish tone, and we'll pretend that this is the snow peak zone. That looks pretty good. But this isn't quite so good. So let's close out the material for now. And let's modify the texture tag that was added to the loft NURBS when we dragged and dropped the texture on there. Now that tag has some different settings that are really quite useful. It has the projection type, which is currently set to UV mapping. You want to change that to flat. So now that it's flat, you're going to see it looking really weird. But that weirdness is controllable. And the way you control it is you have loft NURBS selected, and you click on this little checkerboard pattern. And when you orbit around, you can see the checkerboard pattern is actually the texture placement. And I'm going to show you with the move tool what happens when I move that object. When I move it around in space, you can see how it changes, but it's moving kind of weird. To get real control over this thing, you do have to turn on also the access point modifier. So you have to turn that on and turn on the checkerboard. Those two things turned on allow for use for some really nice controls, where now I can use the scale tool and scale my texture so that now it looks like the mountaintop is being colored like as if it's got a snow cap. So I'm going to scale and position this texture basically where I want it. And if I want to modify the texture at a very finite level, I'm going to want to go back to my color that I modified with the gradient and make my adjustments there. And you can see it out there taking place. I can even give a little bit of a turbulence, which will add some nice unevenness to the snowy sort of capping there. You don't want to go too far because it'll go out of control a little bit, but that might look good depending on what you're going for. For our purposes, we're going to stick around 5, or maybe 7, something like that. You're going to see some stretching on the side here because of our mapping. Because of our mapping adjustment. If this stretching bothers you, then you can go for a different kind of mapping layout. See here, you can see the stretching a lot. Depends on what kind of object you are making. Alright, I'm happy with this. Now I'm going to deselect it and just kind of look at it all around. Okay, looks good. So this could be a mountain way off in the background. The closer you get, the more details you're going to need on this mountain. I think that's pretty obvious. Let's create a new texture. And let's go into the load material preset. And let's try for a visualize materials under load material preset, visualize materials. And let's go to stone. Let's take a look what we got here. Looks like we got some marble. It might be kind of nice. Let's try marble 3. Let's go ahead and just throw it onto the mountain. And you're going to see that the mountain actually has its texture removed entirely. But if we hit Control R to render, you can see that it's actually applied. It might be a setting. But now we're able to see it a little bit better, but let's see if we can get it to look better. I'm going to double click on the material here and see if I can change for the editor the default texture preview size to a larger amount. And then let's see if that did anything. Not really. So I'm kind of stuck with viewing it like this simplistic color until I hit Control R. Now my snowy mountain cap is gone, but I want that back. So let's look at the texture tag that's been applied here for the marble. If we look under Mix Textures underneath the tag settings, we can turn on Mix Textures and there's a change. Now if we render, we're going to see the combination of the two textures together. So you can mix textures and allow for textures to blend to get different results. And depending on what you're looking for, you may want to adjust the texture of this marble. I can see that the color and the reflection, I don't need reflection, so I'm going to turn that off. There's a specularity that might be a little bit too much. Maybe I want to tone that down a little bit in the height. And maybe I want to take this color and move it by grabbing this and dragging it down to bump. And once I get to bump, I can drop it onto the texture. And that copies it. See that move again? Go to the texture you want to copy and you click and drag down to the channel where you want to copy it, in this case the bump, and then you drop it into the square or the little arrow, and then it copies it. But you do still have to turn on the bump. And if we turn up the bump settings, we might get to see a little bit of a bumpy surface now. But it's not so apparent. So let's copy that into the displacement and see if there's a really neat change that can happen there. I'm going to turn on sub-polygon displacement. I'm going to turn on the texture with the check mark, and we can see our sample right here has changed. I want to base this off of the lights and darks. Let's see what it did. Control R. Now we can see all sorts of little ridges and definitions happening here that portray the object that's really quite simple to make and makes it seem a whole lot more complex. Now this isn't really a very complex mountain, but it could be a mountain that may be good enough depending on what kind of purpose you have for the mountain. And you can mess around with the height settings to get different results. I'm going to try 2 feet up in the air. It might be a little too much. Let's try 1 foot. And let's get up nice and close and see what this looks like. Close this and render. Control R. Not too bad. Let's add a light. Click on this light and locate it. You may have to turn on filter and light. Make sure there's a check mark on light. With the light selected, and you will have to turn off the UVW map checkerboard or the little double arrow. Go back to the object mode, and now I can select my light. Going back to the object mode. I'm going to set the light behind the mountain, maybe a little bit higher, maybe to the side. Now to make the light visible, visible light can be turned on, visible light, and now we see that the light will be visible. And when we hit Control R, when we render, we see that the light is visible. If I want this to be the sun, then I'd better make it a sunny kind of color. So let's change the light color to a yellow. Now going over to the visibility, we can adjust the inner distance, that's the hot spot of the sun, and the outer distance, that's the glow range. Next, let's take a look at some lenses. How about we change the glow from inactive to Sun 1. Sun 1 is a pretty decent glow. I like it. Let's render this. That's the visible light, and here comes the glow. The glow has to be post rendered, and Cinema 4D's got a pretty nice glow set for that. So that light is going to be for the glow. Now let's turn on the infinite light to add some backlighting. The little dot right here represents which way the light is facing for our infinite light. Let's rotate the light on the y-axis this way so it hits on the opposite side of the mountain. So we get a little bit of light. A little bit of light. Now underneath the general settings of the infinite light, let's change it to a color. It's kind of bluish and grayish. Now let's see what it looks like. Control R for render. Now we can see the mountain has a little bit of coloration. Oop, and it went away. Oops. Now let's add a floor. The floor looks like it doesn't go that far, but it's actually going to go on for infinity. So let's move it up till our mountain is somewhat buried. That's good. We're going to pretend that that's water. And if we go to Create under the Material Creator, Create, Load Material Preset, Visualize, Materials, Nature, Water, Ocean, Animated. Let's create that. So now we have a water ocean texture. Let's apply it to the floor. And let's go ahead and hit render and see what that looks like. Okay. Let's angle the camera a little bit lower. And let's create one more thing. Create physical sky. If you don't have the create, you may have to adjust your layout from whatever you have to startup. The layout startup is where you're going to find create. Physical sky, right here, under create. When we create the physical sky, we need to check the time settings, time and location. Currently it's set for 12 noon. I want it a little bit earlier. That's pretty good. Let's check the basic settings. We have a sun turned on. I guess we can leave that on. We can turn on clouds. And let's take a look Actually, let's take the sun off. There we go. Now with the sun off, we have our own sun, and I think we're all set to render this. Let's go ahead and do that. It's going to take a little bit because it's calculating all the lights. Now, this might look more like an iceberg, or it might look like something else, but you can see how quickly you can get some pretty pleasing detailed results just by messing around with some settings. Okay, well, thanks a lot, everybody, for checking this out. And if you want to save what you've created, you just go to the render settings up here, the little gear box, and under output, you can set your width and resolution you want. Current frame is what you're going to be rendering out, frame 0 or whatever frame you're currently on. And then make sure you have a check mark and save. The format I like to use is PNG. You can turn on PNG. 8-bit is fine unless you want to have some alpha channel. Then you can add that as well. I'm going to leave it off. And then just hit the little button right here and you can give it a name. Call it Mountain on Ocean. I'm going to save it to the desktop. You want to check your anti-aliasing settings. Make sure they're set from geometry to best to get the best results. And your filter from cubic still image to Gauss animation. And that's it. After you've done all that, you just hit the render button right here in the middle. And then you'll get the picture viewer, which will show you the render in progress. And there you have it. A light, secondary light, an ocean, a sky, a little mountain in a matter of minutes. It's creating a reflection of the sun right now. The snow cap doesn't look all that great, but with a little finessing of the texture, you can get it looking pretty good. And there we go, glorious sun blaring over the ocean and mountain in the middle of the ocean. This mountain. So thank you one and all for hanging out with me, and I hope you enjoyed this tutorial of how to create a mountain in the middle of an ocean very easily and very simply without going overboard on the details. So try out and experiment with the loft NURBS and see what you can make. All sorts of different designs and mechanical parts can also be made with the loft NURBS. It's very versatile. Have a wonderful day, and I will see you soon. Bye-bye.